Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Anne. Happy New Year.
Oh, yeah. Happy New Year.
Well, it's December for us, so that feels weird, but Happy New Year to you, listener.
Happy New Year, listeners. Happy to see you. Happy to have you back.
Happy to see you
in this 2025.
We are in for it.
Yes.
But Lord, we don't even need to talk about that.
No, we do not. Not on today. But do you know what we do need to talk about?
What?
All the ways people can support the podcast.
Woo!
Yes. You can support us by buying some merch at tinyurl.com/CWHmerch. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/convoswithawoundedhealer, or you can rate us, which super helps actually, at ratethispodcast.com/woundedhealer.
Boom.
Boom.
Well, how are you?
How am I? I'm good. I'm not working at the moment. So we're going to see how it goes with me taking 3 weeks off with no schoolwork, because I'm done with that. No clients, no nothings. It's going to be an experiment because I'm not good at not doing things.
Oh, you'll find something to do.
Oh, that's not the problem. The problem is
Right.
actually trying to not do so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you?
I am very busy. I have been feeling better, which is great. I don't know if the listeners know that, because that really started to happen a little before Thanksgiving. Yeah, hormone replacement therapy. God bless. God bless. And I'll just tell listeners, if you struggle with getting your gynecologist or your PCP to trust you that you're in perimenopause, there is, if you just like Google, what is it, Menopause Society? Oh, shit, I should have known what it was before I said this, but there are like menopause trained practitioners who know what they're talking about.
Oh.
Make sure you go watch the M Factor documentary on PBS because there is support out there. You can feel like a normal person instead of feeling like just a blob that kind of blobs around the world. Because that's what I felt like.
You're really selling perimenopause.
Girl, I ain't trying to lie.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're feeling better. It's nice to hear.
Thank you. It's nice to be.
So before I ask you about my conversation with our guest today, I want to kind of give listeners a couple of heads up. First of all, our guest today, her name is Elle McAlpine, and she is an intimacy coordinator. And what that means is she coordinates any type of scenes in film or movies where actors are going to be really close together, whether it be like romantic, sexual, or just kind of like personal space sort of invadey that aren't fight scenes. And I don't know how well we kind of covered that. And she's also going to mention a few of the names of, or we're going to talk about some of the things that she's been working on. But if listeners haven't seen them, some of the names may kind of be like, I don't know who she's talking about. So she recently worked on Poor Things, the Oscar-winning movie with Emma Stone, which was directed by Yorgos. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I forgot to look it up before this.
Sure.
So she's going to talk about Emma and Yorgos, and that's who she's talking about. She also was the intimacy coordinator on Baby Reindeer, which is the it is the hit Netflix TV show. And when we talk about Baby Reindeer, we do talk about some of the intense scenes around rape. So if any listeners are sensitive to that type of topic, this one might not be for you, or just go carefully while you're listening.
And or if you don't want spoilers.
And or if you don't want spoilers. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So all that aside, Sarah, what did you think about this conversation?
I think it's fascinating. And it's so interesting because I'm trying to think of like where to put this in my brain. So sexual abuse survivor here, and you talk about Poor Things and then get into Baby Reindeer. And in the Poor Things part, like literally the only thing I remembered about Poor Things was that, again, if you haven't seen the movie, I guess this is a spoiler, that like Emma Stone is basically a child at the beginning and like, right?
Yeah.
And there are sex scenes, or I don't remember if there's sex at that point, but essentially like sexual contact that I had a very bad reaction to because it's non-consensual because she isn't a consenting adult. And then Baby Reindeer also has really serious sexual assault. And Baby Reindeer was so impactful for me.
Yep.
And as a sexual assault, abuse, whatever, survivor, when I watched it, like I was so moved by how healing that must have been for him. So if you haven't seen Baby Reindeer and you have the capacity to tolerate really, really challenging like sexual assault stuff, and you want to know what it feels like to be a sexual assault survivor, watch that. Because his recovery is exactly what it feels like. And so I think that Ellie probably did an amazing job to like support Richard in getting in that space to be able to be okay and do this. And like, I'm just guessing. I would love to talk to him, by the way. So Ellie, if you're listening and you've got his number, let me know, because that would be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
About using art to heal. Yeah, that really moved me. And I have somebody important in my life who I won't name, who actually like I told them to watch this, and after they watched it, they remembered being assaulted by a friend as a kid. And so it's like that show is not for the faint of heart, but it's so real. It is real. And so A+ Elle for the work that she's doing. And I mean, she is a healer.
Honestly, and I could feel it just through the screen when we were talking. And I was like, man, you must be the best person to be around for actors who are like Richard Gadd and Baby Reindeer, or people who are just like, man, this is a really awkward, uncomfortable thing to be doing. Yeah, I think, we kind of talk about it towards the end, but, I think that showing sex in a lot of different ways that aren't like the 1990s, soap opera, like soft filter. Everyone is like making the appropriate level of noise and like, everything is just like so formulaic. I think there's something so important about this.
Especially when we have porn only showing a certain type of sex.
Yeah.
Right now. And a lot of teens are apparently, what was the show called? There's this show called Social Studies on FX, on Hulu, that is like following teens nowadays. And they had a couple episodes about sex and porn and what a challenge it is for young people right now, having that as a model for what sexuality should look like.
Yeah. Having varied like ways of looking at sex and sexual contact, including the uncomfortable ones that we don't want to know about or talk about or see.
Yeah.
I think it's just important work. And, I think she's doing something amazing. So with that, I will introduce our guest today. Elle McAlpine is a co-founder of EK Intimacy. Elle's professional experience in acting gives her a unique skill set, drawing on her knowledge of actors and directors' processes. Her curiosity for intimate storytelling and passion for exploring a character's psyche through sexual expression helps facilitate a creatively rich space for creatives and production. She offers tools and exercises anchored in embodiment and energetics that allow actors to have agency when making creative choices during the sculpting of a sex scene. Her recent work includes Poor Things, One Day, and Baby Reindeer. So please enjoy this conversation with Elle McAlpine.
Are you feeling the seismic shifts currently reshaping the therapy field? From AI to rising healthcare costs, our field is at a crossroads. But what if these disruptions weren't just challenges, but opportunities for transformation? I'm excited to introduce Redefining the Future of Psychotherapy, a groundbreaking 12-week program where I've partnered with organizational consultant Mark Matisse to help therapists navigate and thrive in these challenging times. Together, we'll explore how cultural values and systemic forces are impacting mental health care. You'll learn to apply powerful frameworks like spiral dynamics to enhance your practice, transform challenges into opportunities, and develop practical strategies for both you and your clients. Starting February 13th, 2025, we'll meet virtually every Thursday for live interactive sessions. You'll earn a Level 1 certification in spiral dynamics, and up to 24 CEUs are available. This isn't just about surviving these tumultuous times. It's about working together to create positive change. Register now at tinyurl.com/futureoftherapy and join us in redefining the future of psychotherapy. That's tinyurl.com/futureoftherapy.
Elle McAlpine, welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Hello, Anne. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and yeah.
Absolutely. So yes, hi, I'm Elle. I am an actor and predominantly intimacy coordinator who works in the UK. I've been working as an intimacy coordinator for about 6 years now. And the reason I'm on the podcast is because I'm an intimacy coordinator. I always have to kind of, I don't know, there's still a part of my heart that's like, oh, the acting thing.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. The intimacy coordination has sort of taken me to lots of amazing places and meant that I get to do these amazing podcasts. So, why not? But yes, so an intimacy coordinator, it might be helpful for your audience for me to describe what it is. We are essentially a very new department in the TV and film and now slowly theatre industry. And essentially it is a role that kind of bridges a lot of different things, but predominantly we are kind of advocate for actors when it comes to things of intimate content. And that includes, any simulated action, any scenes of nudity, any kind of familiar intimacy. So the spectrum of what intimacy means is quite broad, and it's getting broader actually. We're brought on a lot more for different things, for things that we weren't necessarily brought on about 5 or 6 years ago. So yes, we advocate for actors. We liaise between all different departments within the kind of production that we're working on. So that's from like the makeup team to the costume department to your producers, your location teams. And we just ensure that everything has been spoken about prior to getting on set and that it's prepared for what we are going to be shooting that day. And then we help choreograph if that's a side, that's sort of where my skills lie. I've done a lot of movement and physical theatre. So that's where my kind of creative flow comes in when I'm helping, create a scene. But that's the kind of 3-tiered element of what we do. And it's very new and it's a very interesting job to do because it's not necessarily fully accepted. And so sometimes there's been a lot of advocating, not only for those that you're working with, but also for yourself, and trying to kind of shift and influence quite an archaic machine.
What does it mean that it's not fully accepted yet? Does it mean like you're getting pushback from like producers, directors, actors?
Interestingly, actually, the pushback's not from producers because the producers see us as quite a benefit in terms of insurance.
Okay.
So
right.
They're like, we have to have one because ultimately we don't want to get in trouble and we don't want to be sued.
Right.
But from them, it's not really an issue. It's usually the creative teams, and it's getting much easier. But it's initially was from directors who didn't really understand the role, had
done
a lot of sex scenes in their career, so didn't really understand why you'd suddenly have to bring someone on to specifically handle those scenes.
Okay.
Sometimes from actors themselves, they've done a lot of sex scenes in their careers, and they're like, why do I suddenly need someone telling me to have sex or how to have sex?
Sure.
So yeah, it's quite nuanced, the kind of pushback and the tension that we can feel on set sometimes. But it's a challenge, and it's quite amazing watching someone being quite judgmental about the role or being quite resistant to the role, and then softening into it when they realize actually what the role requires and what it entails, and how it ultimately can hopefully assist and help in their process and in these scenes. Ultimately, we're just there to make sure that communication is had across the board, so everybody knows exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
To make sure that all actors' nudity levels are honoured, and that they're not being asked to do things that they don't necessarily want to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes telling them that their hips aren't quite moving in the way that makes it look realistic on screen, or you need to do slight different undulation with your spine. You know, it can be very specific. But yeah, the resistance is getting less, but it's shifting again. It's actors now who maybe haven't worked with intimacy coordinators that they necessarily gelled with, having a kind of resistance to working with you. And, I mean, I'm sure it's quite similar to your profession. You don't always gel with everybody. You can't be the perfect intimacy coordinator for every single actor that you're working with.
It's interesting because as you were sort of talking, I was imagining all these different kind of scenarios that you may end up in. And I kept coming back to the thing that you said about at the same time you're advocating for others, you're also kind of having to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
And what is that like? And what happens for you if those two things don't always line up? If the way that you would want to advocate for someone else necessarily means you don't get to advocate for yourself?
The role seems to attract this is probably quite interesting in terms of the therapeutics of it, but a lot of people pleasers, or like have just learned how to, and I'll speak for myself about myself, but I am incredibly gifted at being able to shift and change and shape shift so that I essentially serve that person and give them what they need. And sometimes that's at the loss of my own integrity, and actually it's a sense of abandonment that I can feel within myself. It's like, I've done something that's completely outside of my comfort zone. And also, you know, it's very rare that I'm sure in a lot of other careers you're constantly kind of like self-analyzing and trying to understand yourself within the kind of parameters of what you do. But when you are working in a role that is so new, and also setting the blueprint for it so that in years to come, it's very much sort of established.
Yeah.
And you're potentially not accepted, or people are not particularly kind.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, they don't care about you. It can be very difficult to do your job well because your nervous system is completely out of whack. So you're like grappling for any sort of sense of security or like acceptance or just being invited in. And that's where I do my job the best. It's when when I can relax and when I can be completely regulated, so that I'm just able to bring what it is that I bring to a set. But yeah, it's very difficult when you're advocating for yourself. Ultimately, your nervous system is out of whack and you're going into sort of fight or flight. So you're like, how do I survive in this? And I can't serve you if I'm doing that. So I've learned to take myself away. I've learned to kind of try and regulate myself. I've learned to try and come back to myself. And, you know, there's little techniques that I have to do that. But yeah, it's a challenge. And I think the more you do this, the more, and interestingly, it all changed after I did Poor Things, because the minute you do something that then, I don't know, like people say something nice in the press and it's wonderful that they do. But my it's definitely changed for me in terms of what people, one, expect of me, but two, how they immediately receive me, because I feel more accepted all of a sudden.
So there's this sort of like external validation because you've worked on an Oscar-winning film.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you should be incredibly proud of. And it's funny because when I watched that movie, I was floored by Emma Stone's performance, but also by all of the sex scenes, because I don't think I've ever seen a film or show capture sex in that way. And I think as a woman, it was so refreshing to see. And so when I heard you on this podcast, because I had in my head, I was like, I wonder how they did this. I wonder how they, I had all these questions, and I heard you on Death, Sex, and Money. And I was like, oh my God, this is the person who like did all of that. And I think what maybe just to kind of offer how your work has affected me, right? And it's interesting because it's through like the body and the like camera lens literally of somebody else. But like, I remember watching that and feeling so liberated and feeling like, oh, there's so much of this, like, this is actually what sex looks like. It's not the sort of like, what you would see on a soap opera in the 1990s or, with the like soft filter and the like, but like, and I think watching Emma Stone's character throughout that, watching Bella's character sort of grow in her own sexuality through it was just like, oh my God, like that was so relatable. And so I think your work really like shined through. And it connected with, I mean, I can't speak for the whole world, but it definitely connected with me and made me go, like, it made me think about my own body and my own sexuality and my own kind of growth on that journey. So it was just really, I don't know. I just think you're doing something incredible.
Thank you. And I mean, that's such a kind and wonderful thing to say. And I'm so pleased about that. And I also just I was thinking about when you were speaking was also, I think there was a sense of, they all felt embodied, even if they weren't at ease within the content of the scene, because some of it was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
As performers, as actors, because they had a space where they could, or just somebody who offered a space where they could just talk about what they were feeling, or, I have tools when it comes to regulation of the body and how you can kind of just come down and essentially feel at ease within your own system. Which you don't necessarily always have to feel at ease in your own system. We're not trying to kind of numb people.
Yeah.
But I think when actors are in those, I mean, I used to think a lot when I was younger watching sex scenes, why do I feel so uncomfortable watching this?
Yeah.
Why am I so uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And I attribute that, and maybe that this is just my opinion, but to the fact that those actors were probably uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Like that's it. It's the same, like there's a million different terms for this in the therapy world, but transference is one of them, or projective identification. That's another one. It's like someone else's experience is somehow getting into you.
Absolutely. Yes.
Or what are you picking up as a result of what's going on for them?
Yes.
And it's funny that you say that, because when I watched Poor Things, I didn't feel uncomfortable with any of those sex scenes, even though some of them were like, oh, this is a bit, but it was, so what you just said really lands for me as a viewer of that.
And I think that's where I kind of, because, I was working with some of the most impeccable performers and creatives, and I was there to kind of course, help with the choreography, but they had a set idea of what those scenes, of how they wanted those scenes. Yorgos very clear. The way him and Emma work and that kind of creative relationship is something just amazing to behold. But I think where I felt the most impactful was helping with the choreography and just like having language so that they could understand anatomically where their bodies were sitting in space and how they moved their bodies to allow it to actually read properly on screen. That was obviously, that was quite a large part of it. Yeah. But the other part of it was in those conversations in their trailers, in those moments in between scenes, in those 4 takes, like where you just, because I've really, my business partner and I had a long conversation about this, because I think sometimes you can do a job and like you don't realize your impact until afterwards. And that was one of them. And I was trying to kind of correlate how I felt about my work on that job to actually how people received it. Because I mean, as a human being and somebody that, probably, I don't know, doesn't have a huge amount of, has an ego, but like tries to keep a handle on it. You're like, I don't think you always have to analyze a job or anything like that. But it's like, why did it do so well in terms of my work? How was I throughout that experience? And how do I kind of not necessarily repeat it, but what was it? What was the kind of fairy dust in that experience? I don't think you can always repeat things. And I think you just have to go and experience a job. But I think that was a combination of a lot of different people working really well together and really cohesively together that created those scenes and made it so powerful.
I hear so much of my job as a therapist in this. So I'm like a mind-body connection. A lot of people come to me because they're like, something's going on up here, but I don't understand how it's correlating to going on down here. And so I'm helping people to sort of bridge that, to rebuild that connection. But I also hear a lot of, what you're saying. So after certain sessions, I'll go, okay, why was that like awesome? Like what did we create? What did my client and I create here that made this work? Or like if we landed on something that was so helpful, and conversely, if it was just a shit session, what was I bringing to the table in that situation? Like what was co-created there? And it's really, I think it's a really amazing thing to have the capacity to sort of reflect on what your contribution is and what everyone else's contribution is. We get trained for that in therapy. And I'm wondering, like, what is that something you sort of naturally discovered, or did someone sort of go, here's how to reflect on an experience, quote unquote, properly, or whatever? Like, how did you land at that being a useful reflection point for you?
I think a lot of the job at the beginning was about constantly unpicking. And I was trained by a woman called Ita O'Brien, who was always incredibly vulnerable in what she shared with us when things went really wrong. And that was obviously so powerful to have an understanding of what doesn't work. And it's very difficult to share when things go really well. I think our bias is towards the negative. So it's like when it goes wrong, the brain, from my experience anyway, just fixates on that. And it's like, why did it go wrong? Why did it go wrong? And I've had to really learn to kind of bring in the positive as well and to sort of balance that out. I think I'm quite a reflective person in general. I'm also being mentored by an amazing woman who actually lives in Brighton. She's called Naomi Absalon. She's an energetics embodiment coach. I've worked with her for 3 years, and there's a lot of self-reflection in that. We have a platform where we do a lot of writing, constant writing, and constant kind of harnessing where your responsibility is and the patterns of behavior that perpetuate in your life. And it's been an amazing tool to utilize in this work because there's no blueprint for it. There's nobody that's done something that I've not done. There's nobody that go, how do I experience? How do I do this? Because nobody's done it. There's nobody there to help.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's people there to help, and I've got an amazing business partner. She's one of my best friends as well. And she's very, very, very vulnerable with me a lot. And we've kind of created this relationship where we will constantly, after each week, reflect and work out what went wrong, what went well, how do we harness the kind of stuff that goes well, and how do we kind of transmute and make sense of the stuff that went bad and see it as not a failure, but as something that we can learn from. It's constant. I mean, sometimes I just need to say to myself, like, have a sleep, Belle.
Yeah.
Have a break. Go to bed.
And I think that that self-care element is so important. And I think what you just said about like, there's no template for what you're doing and you're having to figure things out as you go really resonates with me, because the way that I've lived my life is very different from most people. And so there have been a lot of times where I'm like, someone needs to tell me what to do, because but there's no one to tell me. So, which is really terrifying at times, but also I wonder if you feel like that is an outlet for your creative energy. This like, there's not a template, so I just get to decide.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty powerful when it's going well and you're in flow.
Mm.
And I'm sure you can relate to that when you're doing something. Sorry, that's my dog. When you're doing something that feels kind of, not that you're necessarily, I mean, I don't know if you feel like a pioneer in your own life, but I hope you do, because if you're pioneering a way of living, then how beautiful is that? But when you feel like you're doing something that is impacting others, but then also allowing you to essentially, and this sounds maybe a bit woo-woo, but like become the human being that you were meant to become, and like how that, it's an amazing thing when that's working well. It's devastating when it's not. And you have so much, and like, so connected to your body, constantly coming back, like constantly moving the energy through so that it doesn't lay stagnant and you're not then like anxious. And I think you're a yoga teacher as well, aren't you? So a lot of my work is on myself and just like pulling my body back down and in and down, and then being able to come up and out. And it's just like that constant work. And with me too, you know, I live in the most beautiful place. I live in the Cotswolds. So I walk and I stomp and I go and I connect to nature. And I have my dog who I can cuddle with, and I have my child. And there are things that just bring you back down. But yeah, it's pretty, it can be pretty amazing in terms of like your creative flow. You're like, wow, this is where I feel completely immersed in that.
What's it like for you when you're living in somebody else's world on a project? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm thinking specifically about Baby Reindeer and what it would have been like to have been coordinating and living in his very painful, very traumatic experience. What does that feel like in your body?
I mean, my experience was the most intense of that because I was predominantly only there for those rape scenes.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of consensual, intimate scenes, but there wasn't like a joy to them either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was very isolated in terms of like the trauma for me and his trauma. And, you know, we had an amazing therapist on set. There's a company called Soulless Mind, which is an amazing company that basically is psychotherapists and therapists that are there on set predominantly for actors and crew. She's called Sarah. And what was very interesting about that job was that she had a trailer, but people are not going to go on set to the therapist's trailer. And so I found myself because I was the person on set, and I have to be very, very clear on where my skills stop. I'm like, I am not a therapist. I do not have the skills to take you through this. What I do have skills in is embodiment. But to answer your question, I actually was 6 months pregnant doing that job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and I came away from that job and I had chronic back pain I'd had a perfectly fine pregnancy. And then for about a month, I couldn't walk just straight after that job.
Wow.
And I think it's obviously because I was just holding and just getting through it. But Richard was amazing. You know, he wanted things to be very like for like. So it was always like what he remembered. And he had support. So I was firm in the knowledge that he had support outside. But for me in my body, it was incredibly, it was very difficult. And I remember having an amazing conversation with the producer who I've worked with subsequently since then. He's just one of the best producers I've worked with, you know, and I got very upset. And that's very rare for me. Like, you can't, it's just not the space because you're the one holding, and for you to break, like, oof.
Yeah.
But he was like, you know, you're allowed to feel these things, because I think we all did. It was very difficult, but there was a lot of amazing people. Again, that I think it's how we all co-create something. A lot of amazing people and a lot of people that brought a lot of lightness. And that was really important, like to find those moments of joy within filming those scenes and just going, because it was like this, you know, this horrible house, but it was a studio in Deptford in London. It was pouring with rain most of the time.
Oh God.
But we just needed to do things, you know, to kind of ground and to just get out. But it's difficult. And I think sometimes crews are not necessarily conscious of the fact that they're watching something for 10 hours, how that then impacts their system and their body.
Yeah.
And so I was very, very communicative with the focus puller, the DOP, the script supervisor, just about little things that, you know, just as a conversation, actually I wanted to give them ways to kind of come down from this and to basically get back in their bodies and to realize that what you're watching was really quite traumatic over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I can feel myself tensing as you're talking about it, just at the thought of holding all of that. And I think it's, you know, as a therapist, people talk to me about their stuff, right? They can paint me a picture, but I am not seeing it. And so it's very interesting to think about, especially if he was going for like, what it would be like to actually see someone you care about's trauma recreated on them in real, like in front of you, and what that would do to you. And again, you know, as somebody who watched it it was hard to watch, but it's again clear as a team. Like it felt as authentic and real and gritty. And I don't think anybody who watched that came out the same. And I know that from my own experience, but from I had my clients coming in and telling me, I've watched this, it's changed me, like, and specifically those episodes, like the rape scenes were so powerful. I think as a team, you woke a lot of people up to what that experience is like for so many people.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge responsibility, right? But what's so interesting about these jobs is that you're aware of it at the time, but all you're doing, like for me especially, I have to isolate them as simulated acts. We're creating a simulated sex scene here. It's just, the practicalities of these, which I think is where I also have a skill. It's like, let's just talk about what this is.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about the nuance of this in terms of like choreographically what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so I think what's great about my job is that you can just isolate them as, yes, it's a rape scene. And rape scenes are hard because sometimes you have stunt coordinators there if someone is fighting. But because he was passive to the assault, because he was so high, we didn't have a stunt coordinator because there was no resistance. So, but I had to work with Richard on how he felt, how he could feel as an actor, as Richard now, in control of his body in that moment. And because he was often like eyes closed, passed out when this stuff was happening to him, I was very, very conscious of talking meticulously about what was going on. And we would do it with like eyes open so he knew what was happening. So the other actor, Tom, knew exactly, that so that he felt that Richard was in control of, partly in control of these scenes.
Yeah.
But then, of course, I'm an actor, so I understand like we use a lot of our own experiences to kind of cultivate emotion. It's just and this is literally what this is. It's like, I need to resurface these emotions, which is why his performance was as amazing as it was, because it was already lived and he understood it on a visceral level. Yeah. But for those scenes, I was like, we're going to have to just talk about these, and please just do me the honor of like, let's just try and talk about it methodically so that everybody knows what we're seeing. Everybody is aware. Everybody knows that you're also okay and that you have co-created these scenes in a very like, I am Richard, I am here in 2022 creating these scenes, as opposed to going back 10, 15 years. So it was sort of holding both. And I think when you do it like that, and when actors are completely relaxed and feel safe in that kind of creation, they're then able to relax and the emotion comes through. But I think it's really important to show that and to not be afraid of, within reason, like showing these sorts of scenes, because as you say, so many people have a lived experience of assault. I mean, I think it's something like 60-70% of women have been sexually assaulted or harassed. And so, it's very interesting doing this work as well, because you're coming with actors who potentially have a history of sexual assault and holding that. And sometimes they're very open with you about it. And you have to work out how you kind of orientate yourself around that, not as the therapist, but inevitably you create these amazing relationships where people tell you things and you're privy to people's private lives quite a lot of the time. So I think by the nature of who we are and what we bring, like therapists, that's where our roles, I think, are very similar.
Well, there's something about if you're being entrusted with somebody's like most intimate body parts, memories, moments, movements, there has to be something reciprocated, right? You can't just be a blank wall. Same as like I, as a therapist, cannot just sit there and go, I'm like, that worked for Freud and great for him. But like, he was also a dick. So, there's something about you have to offer something of yourself so that people can trust you, can feel safe with you. And it sounds like that's another place where our professions overlap, is that you do have to give something of yourself to this role and to the people that you're working with that you wouldn't just give, if you were working in an office, for example. And I'm curious what draws you to that line of work, to something where you do give something of yourself in that way.
It's really interesting, you kind of reflecting, like in my personal life, I'm quite reserved. I'm my most extroverted self when I've just met you. And then I find it very difficult to be vulnerable, even with those that I'm closest with. Something happens. It's like this sort of And then I start to go into self-protect. Or I find it I'm often the one asking the questions, and I'm often the one trying to avoid being unpicked, apart from with a few people. I seem to surround myself with people who are very, very good at analyzing themselves and will talk about things and will just chew the cud with me. And I'm probably just in terms of what I give naturally, I'm a good listener. So it kind of is amazing that I've ended up in this job. But you're right. I think what I'm learning is how to open through it. So I think what's happening is that where I obviously want to open and I want to be seen and I want to be understood, I'm finding that quite easy in my job, or at least not easy, but I'm finding that I'm able to practice those muscles or like work those muscles of giving of myself, because I don't think I'm naturally very good at that. And I do think that that's a struggle for people that I'm very close with. That's sort of just reflecting on that, maybe why.
Yeah. Well, and I think your ability to kind of express your own process, like what you just did was kind of working out something in real time. And I think that's a very skilled thing to be able to do, to be able to go, okay, you said this, and now I'm thinking about this. And actually that, not a lot of people can do that. Otherwise I wouldn't have a job, to be honest. But and I think your ability to do that must lend itself, because people who can take in information, think about it, and then kind of offer something back, I think it naturally makes other people feel safe around them. Because you're in the presence of someone who will take things into consideration, and somebody who is not just going to go, yep, great. Oh, or no, that's not, there's no defensiveness. There's like a soft landing for information. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yeah, it makes me quite emotional thinking about it.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting because even as we're talking, like I feel quite connected to you. So you do offer something that is quite special, because it's not every guest that I speak to where I'm like, oh, I want to go have a coffee with her and just like sit and hang out. So there is something about, in that same way that you were talking about, watching those sex scenes on TV and feeling uncomfortable, probably because the actors were uncomfortable. You're giving the opposite, right? Like you're making me want to sit and hang out with you, which I'm definitely going to invite you to do next time you're down in Brighton. But so there's clearly something about your presence and yourself that just naturally disarms.
I think I'm very interested in people and understanding them and connection. I think, and it sounds a bit, I don't know, like it's such a sort of overused word, like connecting and connection, but real, true, authentic connection is not easy. And I want to offer that, like just let people connect to me, because ultimately with actors, if they can connect, if they can be in that energetics of reciprocity and giving and receiving, their system, you see it just relaxes, and so they are then able to do their job to the best of their ability. And I've realized that that's maybe what my skill is. It's like just bringing them into that kind of giving and receiving energetics and relaxing and opening up their channel so that they do the incredible thing that it is that they do. And obviously mine is within a sex scene, so it's very isolated and it's all about the body in a sex scene. But then you see it and you're like, oh, or it's just one note that a director maybe hasn't thought of, and you just like, I just give them this, and you suddenly see their shoulders relax and they can understand it and they unpick it and they feel safe and they're like, great, I can do this. And then suddenly the sex is just like, just amazing. And everyone's like, wow. And sometimes the directors are like, oh yeah, that was my note or something. Or it might be, whatever.
As directors are wont to do.
Like, you don't know what I said.
So how do you feel about the term healer as applied to what you're doing?
Yeah, it feels slightly outside of myself, the idea of being a healer. I know healers, and to be kind of associated with that, it feels very, feels like a massive responsibility. But it also feels, I sort of strangely now thinking about it, kind of aspire to do that. But to be someone that heals in the world, I think is so so powerful. But with it, it's that like the balance of what that power is, because ultimately it's not an egotistical power, is it? It's not something that kind of inflates somebody. It's someone that comes sort of, it's not necessarily devoid of ego, because I don't know if we can all be devoid of ego. I mean, you've got Eckhart Tolle, who doesn't have an ego, but what does that mean? Like, what does that mean?
I don't know that he doesn't. Like, I've read that dude's books. I don't know about that.
Well, he definitely says he does not. So you're right.
Yeah.
Exactly. He probably does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a huge responsibility. And I think if this work is done well, or not even well, because it's not as binary as that, if this work is to have an impact, there's definitely an energetics of that. I mean, I was just thinking what the kind of energetics behind the word healer is. Do you know? What is it?
I don't have an answer for that. I think that's...
Is there an archetype?
I'm sure there is. Here's how I feel about this. Or I guess from having asked so many people this question.
Yes.
A lot of people say, I know someone that I consider a healer. And then when I ask, do you think what you're providing is similar to what they provide? Are other people getting out of what you're doing as what you're getting out of the healer that you know? The answer is almost always yes, or like an uncomfortable, like, yeah, I guess so. Right? And I don't use the word healer as applied to what I'm doing, but like I would say exactly what I just said to you, which was like, but I know people who are, but I know people who would say that I am, right? So I think there's something about, for me, the word carries an energy of, you use the word like aspire. And I think for me, there's an aspiration to that. There's something about, as long as you're aspiring towards it, you're still working ethically and safely. So I never want to hit this.
No.
I want to just keep aspiring to it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh, I think that's how I feel. Because it feels like the minute you kind of call yourself or label yourself that. But then I don't know, because people have labels, people have job titles, people have labels that they put on themselves all the time. We always put on ourselves because we categorize ourselves, right? But that doesn't mean that within that it's not ever shifting, ever evolving, ever changing.
Yeah.
Because it always shifts and moves. So I think I don't even to aspire to be a healer, I'm not even sure what that means.
I think that's fine too. Like it's just a word, right?
But it's a powerful word. It's kind of a political word now. It's kind of becoming more of a thing.
Yeah.
There's so many healers on the internet.
I mean, I live in Brighton, so I'm surrounded by healers. It's amazing we're not shifting on a different vibration down here in Brighton with all the healers.
Oh yeah, and I'm in Stroud, and it's exactly the same. It's that kind of.
I didn't know that about Stroud.
Yeah. Real. Yeah.
Okay, I learned something new. Anything north of London is just mysterious to me because I'm one of those. I'm one of those people. I've been to the Midlands, I've been north, but like it's all anything north of London to me is just it's up there somewhere. Yeah.
Well, Stroud's actually near Wales, so we're southwest. Yeah, so we're sort of Oxfordshire, Cotswolds, southwest.
Hold on, I now have to look this. Everyone's going to hear in real time how bad my geography of the UK is. Oh man, I really sure did think you were
talking about the north,
further north than that. Yeah,
I should have told you. No, we're like southwest.
No, you don't need. I mean, to me, that is still north because it's
north of Brighton.
It's north. It's north of Bristol, which to me feels north as well.
Yes, north of Bristol.
Okay, well, I could probably talk to you for hours, but I want to respect your time. So maybe just one last question. What do you hope for the future of your industry that you are part of growing?
I hope that intimacy coordinators have the knowledge, or not even the knowledge, the desire and the understanding that they have to sort their own nervous system out.
I love that.
They have to.
Yeah.
Because if you're on set and you are dysregulated, you will cause more harm. And that's not to say that you can't be dysregulated sporadically throughout the day. Of course, that's going to happen. You're a human being. But you have to constantly understand yourself, the energetics working within you, your patterns of behavior, and how that impacts your body, and then how that body moves through space in a very high pressured environment, which is the TV and film industry.
Absolutely.
Because it is so intense.
Yeah.
and to discern what's yours and what's not yours. Because as we were talking about transference and energetic, sometimes you can pick up things. And especially when you're working this closely with actors, you can take on so much from everybody. Which is also when you're working with your nervous system and working with like yourself and patterns of behavior, you become very open. And so you have to understand how to boundary it, and not boundary it in the sense of like a brick wall, but like boundary it. Just understand what is yours to hold and what is not yours. And being able to like energetically understand, and I'm not very good at this, but like when you have taken on somebody's and let it go, or like do some sort of physical something to let that go and know that it's not yours. And if you're harboring things, understand why. Because I think there's so many that are at risk, and I have been in this position at risk of major burnout and just leaving the industry because it's such a complicated role. It's like such a political role as well. You're playing with power dynamics. My mentor said to me, she was like, because I'd done quite a lot of interviews, and she was just like, I want you to sit there with your legs spread, with your vulva connected to the ground, and I want you to like own it, like own this fucking job with this sort of soft heart and strong backbone. I'm like, okay, that's a lot. How do I do that? With like remaining myself, but it's like, it's so important. I spend thousands of pounds just to keep understanding myself and like, and that's what I'm giving to myself as a gift so that I can move through this job with integrity, with a sense of safety within myself. Because if you're safe within yourself, you make other people feel safe, right?
Yeah. And I hope that for therapists as well. It's actually what I always hope for therapists is that we work on our own shit before we go try to help other people work on theirs.
Your job is doing amazing things in the world, but you're right. Like if you have a dysregulated therapist, they can cause more harm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Having been, you too. It's just so nice to meet you. And thank you for your wonderful questions. And yeah, you've really made me think. So
I'm glad.
And feel.
Back at you. So your work has made me think and feel and reevaluate and all kinds of stuff. So mutual admiration society here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye.